She never liked surprises. Maybe that was why Lena's life had become so quiet. She worked in a small bookstore tucked at the corner of an old street, where the smell of coffee from the cafe next door mixed with the scent of paper. Every day was almost the same. She opened the shop, greeted a few familiar customers, arranged books on the shelves, and went home when the sun started to sink. People around her often said she was too serious for her age. They didn't know the reason. Years ago, Lena had been engaged to someone she thought would stay forever, but the story ended before it began. He left for another city, chasing a bigger job and a different kind of love. Since then, she'd stopped trusting quick promises. At work, her coworkers liked her but also teased her. They were younger, louder, always planning small games or office jokes. Lena didn't mind most of them, but sometimes she wished they would see her as more than the quiet one. One Friday afternoon, while she was sorting new arrivals near the counter, she heard them whispering behind her. They stopped when she looked over, smiling too quickly. She didn't think much of it. She just kept working. But something about their faces told her they were planning something. Later that day, one of them, a cheerful girl named Rena, walked up with a big smile. "Lena," she said, "we've been talking and we think you should go on a blind date. You deserve a little fun." Lena laughed softly, shaking her head. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Oh, come on," Rena insisted. "He's a friend's cousin. He's nice, successful, polite, everything you say you want. Just dinner." "No pressure," Lena hesitated. The truth was, she hadn't been on a date in almost 3 years. Her world had become safe but small, and something inside her, maybe loneliness, made her think, why not? "All right," she said after a long pause. "Just dinner." Her co-workers clapped like kids who just won a game. She smiled, though she didn't see the quick glances they exchanged. Over the next few days, they helped her choose a dress and even suggested a restaurant, a fancy place downtown, the kind of place she had never been to. They told her the man's name was Adrian. That was all she knew. Saturday came too soon. Lena stood in front of her mirror, smoothing her simple blue dress. She tied her hair in a loose knot and looked at her reflection for a long time. "It's just dinner," she whispered. "Just dinner." The restaurant was glowing with soft light when she arrived. A waiter led her to a table near the center, where a man sat already waiting. He stood up as she approached, and for a moment she froze. He wasn't what she expected. He was older than she imagined, maybe early 40s, tall, calm, dressed in a dark suit that somehow looked effortless. His eyes were gentle but sharp, the kind that noticed small things. He smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile that tried to impress. It was real. "You must be Lena," he said, his voice low and steady. "Yes," she answered, a little nervous. "You're Adrian?" "I am." He pulled out her chair. "I'm glad you came." She sat, still trying to read his face. There was something about the way he moved. Quiet confidence, maybe a trace of sadness behind his eyes. At first, their conversation was simple. The usual questions, work, hobbies, how they ended up in the city. But soon it felt different. He listened carefully, never interrupting. When he spoke, it was thoughtful. He told her he ran a small investment company but didn't like talking about business outside the office. He mentioned having a daughter, 9 years old, who loved drawing and asked questions about everything. When he spoke about her, his eyes softened in a way that made Lena smile. Hours passed without them noticing. The food grew cold on their plates. The restaurant's music changed from lively to soft and slow. Lena realized she was laughing more than she had in months. It felt easy, natural, too natural maybe. When she finally looked at her phone, it was almost 10. "Oh," she said, surprised. "I didn't realize how late it's gotten." "Time moves faster when it's well spent," Adrian said with a faint smile. She blushed a little. "I guess so." Outside, the night air was cool. He offered to call her a cab, but she said she liked to walk a bit before going home. He nodded. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "No," he replied gently. "Thank you for showing up." She walked away with her heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind her, Adrian watched her go until she disappeared into the corner of the street. What neither of them knew was that inside the restaurant, at a back table near the window, 3 of Lena's co-workers were sitting, trying not to laugh too loudly. They had been there the whole time, pretending to be other customers, recording short clips on their phones. To them, it was a harmless joke. They thought Lena would show up, realize it was a prank, and storm out. None of them expected her date to actually be there, or for him to be real. You see, the man sitting across from Lena wasn't part of their plan. Their original Adrian had backed out at the last minute, and by coincidence, this Adrian, a businessman who happened to have a reservation under the same name, had arrived first. The staff assumed he was the one waiting for Lena, fate. It seemed had its own strange sense of humor. As Lena walked home, her co-workers couldn't stop whispering and giggling about how crazy the evening had turned out. They didn't mean harm, not really, but they never imagined how deep their prank would cut when the truth came out. Back in her small apartment, Lena changed into her old sweatshirt and sat by the window sipping tea. She thought about Adrian, his calm voice, his kind eyes, the way he listened. She smiled without meaning to. It had been a long time since she felt seen. She didn't know what to call what she felt. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something warm, something like hope. Before going to bed, she checked her phone. No messages. Then, just as she set it down, a text appeared. "Thank you for tonight, Lena. I don't usually enjoy these things, but you made it easy. Maybe dinner again sometime? Adrian." Her heart skipped. She typed back slowly. "I'd like that." That night, for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep smiling. The next morning, the bookstore buzzed with whispers. Her co-workers asked 1,000 questions. So how was it? Was he handsome? Did he talk a lot? Lena blushed but couldn't hide her smile. "It was nice," she said simply. Rena grinned, nudging the others. "See, we told you it would be fun." They laughed, but a few of them exchanged glances again, uneasy this time. The prank had gone further than they planned, and now they weren't sure whether to confess or keep quiet. Days passed, and Lena and Adrian continued to text. Simple things at first, about books, movies, his daughter's drawings. He told her he admired how she loved quiet things, how she didn't try to be like everyone else. She found herself waiting for his messages every night. At work, her co-workers noticed. They teased her about Mr. Mystery but said nothing more. Guilt was starting to grow inside them, though they tried to laugh it away. One afternoon, as Lena packed her bag to leave, she found an envelope slipped between the pages of a book on the counter. Inside was a card with the restaurant's logo and a note written in familiar handwriting. You really shouldn't have trusted them so easily. Her stomach turned cold. She looked around the shop, but no one met her eyes. For the first time, she wondered if something about that night wasn't what it seemed. She walked home slower than usual, her mind full of questions. Why would someone write that? What did it mean? And what if the date hadn't been what she thought it was? Still, when her phone buzzed again that evening, her heart softened. Adrian had sent a picture of a half-finished drawing, his daughter's latest art project. She says this one's for Miss Lena from the bookstore. Lena smiled, though a small worry stayed in the back of her mind. Sometimes life plays strange games with people who least expect it. And without knowing it, Lena was already standing at the edge of something that would soon test her heart, her pride, and the meaning of kindness itself. That night, the city lights glowed through her window, and somewhere across town, the people who had started the joke were still laughing, unaware that what they had begun as a game was turning into something very real. The next few days passed quietly, but something inside Lena had changed. Every morning she found herself smiling for no reason, replaying moments from that night, the way Adrian looked when he laughed, how his eyes softened when he talked about his daughter, the calmness in his voice. She didn't know what to call the feeling, but it made her world brighter. For the first time in years, she didn't rush through her days just to get them over with. But in the middle of that warmth, the strange note she had found in the bookstore kept returning to her mind. You really shouldn't have trusted them so easily. She had looked at it a dozen times, wondering who had left it there. The handwriting didn't look familiar. She had asked her co-workers lightly if anyone had seen it, but they all shook their heads. Maybe some customer dropped it by mistake, one said, shrugging. Lena tried to believe that, but deep down she couldn't. Something about that night had felt too perfect, almost like a dream that didn't belong to her. A few evenings later, Adrian asked if she would like to meet again. He suggested a quiet park near the river where his daughter liked to feed the ducks. Lena hesitated, Not because she didn't want to go, but because the nervousness had returned. She arrived early, sitting on a bench under a tree, watching families pass by. She wondered what he would look like in daylight. Less formal, more real. When he appeared, walking hand in hand with a small girl carrying a paper bag of breadcrumbs, Lena couldn't help but smile. "Lena," he said warmly, "this is my daughter, Lila." The little girl looked shy at first, hiding behind his arm. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, Lila," Lena said softly. "I've heard you're a great artist." The child's eyes brightened. "I like drawing cats," she said. They laughed, and the three of them walked by the river, feeding ducks and talking about little things, favorite colors, books, even silly stories about school. The afternoon sun turned everything golden, and Lena felt a peace she hadn't known in years. When Lila ran ahead to chase a bird, Adrian looked at Lena with a smile that was more serious than before. "She hasn't warmed up to anyone like that in a long time," he said. "Thank you for being kind to her." Lena shook her head. "She's easy to like." They talked for a while longer, and when it was time to leave, Adrian walked her to the corner of the street. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "Just us, maybe dinner somewhere quiet." Lena nodded, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. "I'd like that." That night, when she told her co-workers she had met Adrian again, they stared at her in shock. One of them dropped a pen. Rena forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Oh, you actually saw him again?" "Yes," Lena said, confused. "Why?" "Nothing," Rena said too quickly. "Just surprised, that's all." The others avoided her eyes. For a moment, the air felt heavy. Then someone changed the subject and the moment passed. But inside, guilt was starting to spread among them like a shadow. The prank had gone too far. It wasn't funny anymore. They had meant for Lena to go on a fake date with someone pretending to be rich and charming, a harmless laugh at her expense. But the plan had collapsed when the man they found canceled at the last minute. They never told her the truth, and somehow she had met a real man with the same name, a man who seemed to genuinely care for her. Now they didn't know what to do. Telling her might ruin everything. Hiding it made them feel worse. Meanwhile, Lena and Adrian continued to see each other. They went for coffee, long walks, and dinners that never felt forced. She told him about her quiet childhood, her love for books, and her fear of being laughed at. He told her about his struggles after his wife's passing, about trying to balance work and fatherhood, and how lonely success could feel. One night, they sat in a small cafe where it was raining softly outside. Adrian looked at her for a long time before speaking. "You make things feel simple again," he said quietly. Lena looked down at her cup, smiling. "I don't think I do anything special." "You do," he said. "You listen. That's rare." The rain kept falling, and for a while they didn't speak. Sometimes silence says more than words. Weeks turned into months. Their connection deepened, not in big gestures but in small, ordinary ways, in shared laughter, quiet dinners, moments when they didn't need to fill the air with words. But just as Lena's heart was opening again, the truth she didn't know was slowly coming closer. One evening, after closing the bookstore, she accidentally overheard two co-workers talking near the back door. "They didn't see her standing there. I can't keep pretending," one whispered. "She thinks everything was real." "Don't say anything," Rena hissed. "If she finds out, it'll destroy her. Besides, it's not our fault that guy showed up instead of the fake one." Lena froze. The room felt smaller. Her hands began to shake. She stepped back quietly before they saw her, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She walked home without feeling the cold, her mind spinning. Pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Their strange looks, the note, their laughter that first night. It had all been a setup. By the time she reached her apartment, tears were already running down her cheeks. She sat on the floor, shaking, trying to breathe. The humiliation burned deeper than she expected. She wasn't angry at Adrian. He didn't know. But the idea that her friends had made her the center of a joke cut something inside her that had only just started to heal. She didn't answer Adrian's calls that night. He left a message asking if she was all right. The next day he came by the bookstore, concern written on his face. "I've been worried," he said softly. "Did I do something wrong?" Lena looked up from the counter, her eyes red. "No, you did nothing wrong." "Then what's going on?" For a moment she wanted to tell him everything, but she couldn't, not yet. "I just need a little time," she said. He nodded slowly. "Take all the time you need." He left quietly and she watched him go, her heart aching. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her coworkers laughing. The memory of that first evening, a night that had felt so magical, now felt tainted. But even through the pain, one thing stood out clearly in her mind. Adrian's face, his kindness, his honesty. He had never been part of their game. The next morning she made a decision. She walked into the bookstore early, before the others arrived, and left a short letter on the counter for her boss. She quit. When her coworkers came in and found the letter, silence filled the shop. None of them spoke for a long time. Rena picked up the paper, her hands trembling. "We ruined her," she whispered. That afternoon, Lena went to the same park by the river. The wind was cool, carrying the sound of water and children's laughter. She didn't know if Adrian would come, but she waited. He did. When he saw her sitting alone, he walked over slowly. "You look tired," he said gently. "I was worried I'd lost you." Lena looked up at him, her eyes full of pain and truth. "You haven't lost me," she said, "but there's something I need to tell you." He listened as she told him everything. How her coworkers had planned a prank, how they never meant for her to meet him, how it was all supposed to be a joke. She spoke through tears, ashamed and angry at herself for not seeing it sooner. When she finished, she looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I understand if you don't want to see me again," she whispered. "I wouldn't blame you." There was a long silence. Then Adrian took a deep breath. "Lena," he said quietly, "do you think I care how we met? That night I saw a woman who was kind, honest, and real. None of that was fake." She looked up, startled. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Sometimes life plays tricks to bring people where they need to be." Maybe this one wasn't a joke. Maybe it was a strange kind of miracle. Tears ran down her cheeks again, but this time they were mixed with relief. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. "Let them laugh," he said. "They don't know what they created." They stood there for a long moment, watching the river move, saying nothing. Lila came running toward them, waving a small paper boat she had made. "Look," she said, dropping it into the water. The little boat drifted forward, rocking gently with the current. Lena smiled through her tears. "It's beautiful." "See," Adrian said softly, watching the boat float away. "Sometimes things start as jokes or accidents, but if you're lucky, they turn into something real." The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold and pink. Lena squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of it. The ache in her heart hadn't fully gone, but for the first time, she knew she wasn't alone. And somewhere inside, she felt that life, unpredictable, messy, and strange, had just given her another chance. After that day at the river, something changed between Lena and Adrian. It wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale, not the kind that rushes toward perfection. It was quieter, steady, real, the kind that grows when two people decide to trust again. Even when they've both been hurt, Lena felt lighter each time she saw him. They didn't talk much about the prank after that. Adrian had made it clear that it didn't matter to him, but sometimes she caught a flicker of sadness in his eyes. Not for himself, but for the way people could be cruel without meaning to. He told her once, "Most people laugh because they don't understand. They laugh at pain they've never felt." She had nodded, holding his hand, and for the first time she didn't feel small because of what had happened. Still, the whispers in town hadn't died down. The story of the blind date prank spread quietly after one of her former coworkers posted a photo online. A blurry image of Lena and Adrian sitting in the restaurant that night. They had meant it as a private joke, but the post caught attention. People were curious, gossiping in the way small communities often do. Lena didn't know about it at first. Adrian did. When he saw the photo and the cruel comments underneath, mocking her, calling her naive, something inside him hardened. He didn't tell her that evening. Instead, he took her and his daughter out to dinner at a quiet place by the lake. Lila spent most of the night drawing on napkins, humming softly. Lena noticed Adrian seemed distracted. "Something's on your mind," she said gently. He smiled a little, shaking his head. "Just business," he said, though his eyes said otherwise. Lena didn't push. She knew people had things they carried quietly, but the truth couldn't stay hidden for long. The next day, while she was helping a neighbor fix a shelf, a message popped up on her phone from a number she didn't recognize. When she opened it, she froze. It was a link, and when she tapped it, she saw the photo. Her heart sank. The caption read, "Remember that joke date?" She actually thought it was real. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Then she sat down, breathing slowly, trying not to cry. It wasn't just the picture. It was the comments. Dozens of people laughing, adding their own cruel words. She didn't even realize she was shaking until her neighbor asked if she was all right. That evening, she called Adrian. Her voice trembled. "Did you know?" There was a pause. "Yes," he said quietly. "I saw it yesterday. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to hurt more than you already have." She didn't answer. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Adrian said softly, "Lena, people will talk until they run out of breath. Let them. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Not anymore." She wanted to believe him, but the shame felt heavy again. "It's easy for you to say," she whispered. "You don't have to walk around knowing everyone is laughing." He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice came, calm and certain. "You're right. But maybe it's time we make them stop laughing." She didn't understand what he meant, not yet. 2 days later, Adrian invited her to a dinner at the same restaurant where they'd first met. She almost refused. The memory of that night still made her nervous, but he insisted gently. "Trust me," he said. "Just come." When she arrived, the restaurant looked almost the same as before. Warm lights, soft music, familiar faces of staff who recognized her. But something felt different this time. There were more people than usual, and at the center a long table had been set up. Adrian was already there, speaking quietly with the manager. When he saw her, he smiled in that calm way she had grown to know. "You look beautiful," he said. She smiled nervously. "What is all this?" "Just dinner," he said, offering his hand. They sat down, and for a while it really was just dinner. They talked about Lila, about work, about the little things that made life feel normal again. But as the evening went on, more people began to glance in their direction. Lena noticed whispers, a few faces she recognized from the bookstore, and even to her shock, some of her former co-workers. Her heart started to race. "Adrian, what's going on?" Before she could finish, he stood up. The music faded slightly as he raised his voice, just enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I wasn't planning to say anything tonight," he began, "but I think it's time." Every head turned. The restaurant grew quiet. Lena's pulse quickened. Adrian looked around the room, his expression calm but firm. "Many of you might know there was a joke once, a cruel little game that brought me here. People thought it would be funny to make a good woman the target of laughter. They thought kindness was weakness." Lena felt her stomach twist. She wanted to disappear, but he reached for her hand, steadying her. He continued, "That night, by accident or fate, I met her. Someone who reminded me what honesty looks like." She sat here, nervous and hopeful, while others laughed behind her back. But she still smiled. She still believed in people. A hush fell over the room. Some of the waiters stopped moving. Adrian's voice grew softer. "And if that's something to laugh at, then maybe the joke's on the rest of us." He turned to Lena, his eyes steady. "Because that night changed my life. It reminded me that real connection can come from the most unexpected places." People were staring now, whispering to one another. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket. The small sound of a box opening seemed to echo louder than the music. Lena froze. "Lena," he said, his voice trembling slightly for the first time. "I don't care how this started. I don't care what anyone thinks. You've brought light back into my world, into my daughter's world. So if you'll let me, I'd like to make this accident something permanent. Will you marry me?" The entire restaurant fell silent. Lena stared at him, tears filling her eyes. The world around her disappeared. All she could see was this man, the one who had looked past her shame, her fear, and her past. Her hands shook. "Adrian." He smiled gently. "Only if you want to." For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded, whispering through her tears, "Yes." The silence broke, not with laughter this time, but with applause. Even the people who had come expecting gossip were on their feet. The co-workers who once laughed at her now lowered their heads, too ashamed to meet her eyes. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't extravagant. A simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light softly. She looked at it, still trembling, barely believing it was real. Afterward, When the crowd slowly returned to their meals, Adrian pulled her close and whispered, "Now the joke is over." Lena laughed through her tears. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said, "because people needed to see who you really are, and who I see when I look at you." They stayed a while longer, talking quietly. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky. When they finally stepped out hand in hand, the air felt different, lighter, freer. The story that had once humiliated her had now turned into something unforgettable. The next morning, the news spread fast. Someone had recorded the entire moment. The speech, the proposal, everything. But this time it wasn't cruel. The video went viral for another reason entirely. People were moved. They called it the proposal that silenced a crowd. Messages poured in from strangers. People thanking Adrian for standing up for kindness, for turning cruelty into compassion. Lena was overwhelmed. She had never wanted fame, but she couldn't deny the strange beauty in how things had turned out. Her former co-workers tried to reach out, apologizing again and again. She forgave them, though not right away. Forgiveness, she realized, was something that needed time. That evening, Adrian came to her apartment with Lila. The little girl ran to her and hugged her tightly. "Daddy said you're going to be part of our family," she said, smiling. Lena knelt down, tears in her eyes. "If you'll have me, I'd love that." Lila nodded with excitement. "Can we all draw together now?" They spent the rest of the night around the small kitchen table, drawing silly pictures and laughing until it hurt. Adrian watched them with quiet joy, the kind that doesn't need words. Later, as they said goodnight, he touched her hand and said, "You see, sometimes the worst days lead to the best beginnings." She smiled. "I believe that now." Outside, the city was calm. The same streets where she once walked home crying now felt full of possibility. The laughter that once haunted her was gone, replaced by something stronger, something that sounded a lot like love. She went to sleep that night with a heart that no longer felt heavy. The world had tried to make her small, but she had found someone who saw her worth before she did. And as the days went by, she stopped caring what others thought. She had her peace, her love, and a future she never expected. Sometimes life doesn't give you what you ask for. It gives you what you need, hidden behind a joke, a mistake, or a broken plan. And if you're brave enough to keep your heart open, it can turn pain into something beautiful. That's what happened to Lena. They set her up as a joke, but fate somehow decided she was the punchline worth keeping. The days after the proposal felt like a dream that Lena could barely keep up with. She woke up each morning wondering if it had really happened. The restaurant, the applause, the way Adrian looked at her with such certainty when he asked her to marry him. The story spread quickly. People from all over the city began talking about it. News pages wrote about the public proposal that shut down a prank. Some said it was romantic. Others said it was unbelievable. But for Lena, it wasn't about what people said. It was about what she finally felt. For years she had lived quietly, always afraid of being noticed, afraid that people would laugh again if she ever tried to step into the light. Now she was standing in it, and it didn't hurt. Adrian tried to keep her away from the noise. He told her, "People will talk for a while, then they'll move on. What matters is what we keep between us." He meant it. He never let her face the reporters or the people who wanted interviews. He simply said no, protecting her from a world she wasn't ready to face. Still, when Lena walked through the streets, strangers smiled at her. Some came up to say, "We saw your story." It gave us hope. She didn't know what to say except thank you. One afternoon, as she helped a customer at a new little bookstore where she had started working part-time, an elderly woman walked in and said, "You're the girl from the story, aren't you?" Lena smiled shyly. "I suppose I am." The woman reached out and held her hand gently. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small again. What that man did for you, that's rare." Lena nodded, her throat tightening. "I won't forget." When she got home that evening, Adrian and Lila were waiting for her. Lila had made something out of colored paper, a tiny heart glued to a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's us," Lila said proudly. "You, me, and Dad." Lena smiled so hard it made her eyes wet. "It's perfect." Adrian kissed the top of Lila's head and said, "She's been working on it all day." Said she wanted to make it official. They laughed together. and for a moment everything felt simple again. But life, as always, had a way of testing people just when they thought the storms were over. A week later, Adrian's business faced a sudden problem. One of his partners made a risky deal without telling him, and it caused a wave of losses. The media that once praised him began asking questions about his company. It wasn't a scandal and just bad timing, but it made him tense and quiet. Lena noticed the change right away. "You're not sleeping," she said one night, watching him stare at his laptop. He sighed. "It's just work." "I'll fix it," she put her hand over his. "You don't always have to fix everything alone." He looked at her and smiled faintly. Old habits. Lena stayed by his side through the long days that followed, bringing him tea, taking care of Lila when he had late meetings, reminding him to breathe when things got too heavy. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he'd watch her quietly, wondering how he'd ever managed without her. One evening, after putting Lila to bed, he found Lena standing by the window, looking at the city lights. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" he asked. She turned, surprised. "What do you mean?" "If that night hadn't happened, if the prank hadn't brought us together, do you ever think about what your life would have been?" She smiled softly. "Maybe quieter, maybe lonelier, but I think I would have found you anyway somehow. Some people are meant to meet no matter how strange the road." He stepped closer, pulling her into his arms. "You always find the right words." "It's the book," she said with a small laugh. "They teach me things." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You teach me things too." Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Adrian's business stabilized. His calm way of handling problems impressed even his critics. People began to see him not just as a wealthy man, but as someone who carried grace through chaos. Through it all, Lena stayed beside him, not for money or comfort, but because she had seen the man behind the title, the one who loved quietly and protected deeply. When the worst of it passed, he surprised her again. One morning, she woke to find a small envelope on the table beside her coffee. Inside was a simple note: "Pack a bag. Nothing fancy. We're leaving for 2 days." She looked up in surprise as he came out of the kitchen with a grin. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see." They drove out of the city, past long roads and fields that shimmered under the afternoon sun. Lila slept in the back seat, her head resting against her sketchbook. After a few hours, they reached a quiet seaside town. Small cottages, the smell of salt in the air, and waves that rolled softly against the shore. Adrian parked the car and said, "This is where I used to come with my wife before she passed. It took me years to come back." Lena looked at him, unsure what to say. He took a deep breath. "I wanted to come back here, but not alone. I wanted to bring someone who understands what it means to start again." Her eyes softened. "Thank you for bringing me." They spent the evening walking along the beach, Lila collecting seashells while Adrian and Lena watched the sunset. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried the smell of salt and peace. For the first time, Lena felt like her heart had found a home, not a place, but a feeling. That night, after Lila fell asleep, they sat outside on the porch of the cottage wrapped in a blanket, listening to the sound of the ocean. "I used to think happiness was something you earned," Lena said quietly. "Like a reward for suffering, and now?" Adrian asked. "Now I think it's something you learn to allow. It's always waiting. You just have to stop fighting it." He smiled, holding her closer. "Then let's allow it together." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Together sounds perfect." The next morning, Lila woke them up early to show them the shells she'd arranged into a heart shape on the sand. "Look," she said proudly. They walked down to see it, laughing. The tide came in, touching the edge of the heart but never washing it away. Lena watched the water glisten and whispered, "It's like life, isn't it? The waves come, but some things stay." Adrian looked at her and nodded. "Exactly." When they returned to the city 2 days later, things began to settle. The noise around their story faded, the gossip finally replaced by new distractions. But the people who had once laughed never forgot how Adrian had stood up that night, how he turned mockery into respect. Lena's old co-workers eventually came to see her. They stood outside the bookstore, nervous and unsure. Rena spoke first, her voice shaking. "We never meant for things to go that far. We were stupid. We thought it would be funny." "It wasn't?" Lena looked at them for a long time, then sighed softly. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I just hope you learned something from it." They nodded, eyes downcast. "We did," Rena said quietly. "And we're sorry," Lena smiled faintly. "Then that's enough." When they left, she stood for a moment outside the store, watching the sunlight spill through the window. She realized she didn't feel anger anymore and only peace. That evening, she and Adrian had dinner with Lila, who couldn't stop talking about school. Between her stories and Adrian's laughter, the house felt full, warm, alive, real. After they finished, Lena stepped out to the balcony. The city lights sparkled below, and she thought about everything that had happened. The prank, the humiliation, the kindness that followed, and the unexpected love that grew from it all. Adrian joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "I was just remembering," she said. "How far we've come." He kissed her cheek. "And we're only getting started," she smiled. "You always say that." "Because it's true," he said, smiling back. "Every day is another beginning." As they stood there, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in years: complete peace. She had learned that life didn't always make sense, that people could be cruel and kind in the same breath, that heartbreak could lead to healing, and that sometimes love walked into your life through the most unexpected doors. The world had once set her up to fall, but somehow she had landed in love, and when she looked at Adrian, steady, patient, and kind, she knew that the joke had long ago stopped being funny. It had become a story about grace, about second chances, and about the quiet courage it takes to keep believing in good people. The city outside kept moving, full of strangers who would never know the full story, only the part that made headlines. But Lena didn't need the world to understand. She just needed the life she had now, one made of laughter, kindness, and the simple joy of being loved for who she truly was. As she turned to Adrian, she whispered, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You made it easy." In that moment, with the lights of the city glowing below and the sound of Lila's laughter drifting from the next room, Lena knew that her story, once a cruel setup, had become something far more powerful. A reminder that love doesn't always arrive politely. Sometimes, it shows up disguised as a joke, only to end as a promise. The years that followed were quiet in the best way, the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness but from peace. Lena often thought back to that night, the night when everything had gone wrong, only to lead her exactly where she was meant to be. Sometimes she still found it hard to believe how her life had changed. The woman who once sat alone in a small apartment, reading books to fill her silence, now woke up each morning to laughter echoing through the house. Lila would run down the hallway, her tiny footsteps bouncing off the walls, and Adrian would already be in the kitchen making breakfast, his sleeves rolled up, humming softly. Their home wasn't a mansion like the ones people imagined when they thought of a businessman. Adrian had moved them into a warm, sunlit house near a park. It had an old oak tree in the backyard and a front porch where Lena kept pots of flowers she tended to every morning. She loved simple things: the smell of coffee, the soft rustle of pages as she read before bed, the way Lila's laughter filled the rooms. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and real was enough. Adrian still worked hard, but he no longer worked late into the night like before. He'd promised himself that no meeting or contract would ever be more important than the people waiting at home. Sometimes, when Lila had a school play or a project, he'd take the whole day off just to be there. He always said, "Success means nothing if you're too busy to clap for your kid." Lena admired that about him. She often thought about how strange. It was the same man who had once been surrounded by reporters and investors now spent his evenings helping a little girl glue paper stars to a cardboard sky. But maybe that was what made him different. He knew how to build an empire, but he also knew how to build a life. Lena found her own small happiness in writing. After her story became known, a local magazine had asked her to share her thoughts about forgiveness and resilience. She had written a short piece titled "The Night That Changed Everything." She didn't name anyone. She simply wrote about kindness, about how even pain could lead to something beautiful if you let it. The piece went viral again, but this time not as gossip, as hope. Letters came in from strangers, some from women who had been humiliated or hurt, thanking her for reminding them that they were more than the cruelty they'd faced. Some came from men who said her story made them rethink how they treated others. Lena didn't see herself as an inspiration. She just saw herself as someone who had survived and chosen to keep her heart open. One day, as she walked through the park with Lila, a young woman stopped her. "You're Lena, aren't you?" the woman asked softly. Lena nodded. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I saw what happened to you. I was going through something similar back then. I almost gave up on people, but your story made me believe again. Thank you." Lena smiled and took her hand gently. "You're the one who kept going. That's what matters." As the woman walked away, Lila looked up at her and asked, "Why do people always say thank you to you?" Lena laughed lightly. "Because sometimes, when one person tells the truth about what they went through, it helps someone else feel less alone." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "Like when I tell my friends I'm scared of the dark and then they say they are too?" "Exactly like that," Lena said, smiling. That night, when she told Adrian about it, he listened with a soft smile. "You see? You think you're ordinary, but you change lives without even trying." "I just tell the truth," she said. "That's what makes it powerful." A few months later, they decided to do something special. Adrian wanted to take them on a small trip, not for work, not for publicity, just for the three of them. They drove to a quiet mountain town a few hours away. The air was crisp and cool, and the smell of pine filled the mornings. They stayed in a little cabin overlooking a lake, where the water reflected the sky so clearly that it felt like the world had doubled itself. Lena loved it there. No city noise, no phones, no gossip, just time. On the second evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Adrian lit a small fire outside. Lila roasted marshmallows while he and Lena sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky turn gold and purple. Adrian looked at her and said, "Do you ever think about how fast things change?" "All the time," she replied. "But I think some things change us for the better." He nodded. "I used to think life was about control, about keeping everything perfect. But when I met you, I realized the best things are the ones you never plan for." She smiled softly. "Like that night," he chuckled. "Exactly. The worst setup turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "To both of us." A quiet wind passed through the trees, carrying the sound of the lake. The fire crackled softly, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, as if the world had slowed down just to let them breathe. Later that night, as Lena tucked Lila into bed, the little girl asked, "Will you and Dad get married for real one day?" Lena smiled. "Maybe. Why do you ask?" "Because then I can wear a flower crown," Lila said with a yawn. Lena laughed. "We'll see about that." When she came back to the porch, Adrian was standing there looking at the stars. She joined him quietly, slipping her hand into his. He turned to her with a calm smile. "You know she's right." "About what?" "About the flower crown." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he said, his voice steady. "We've already lived like a family for years. Maybe it's time we make it official." Lena blinked, speechless. She thought he was joking, but his expression told her otherwise. "Adrian," he smiled softly, "you don't have to answer now. I just want you to know, and I meant what I said that night. I want every dinner, every morning, every year with you." Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the quiet shock of being loved so honestly. She squeezed his hand. "Then yes, one day soon." He kissed her forehead gently. "One day soon." The next morning, Lila woke up early and ran outside, yelling, "We're going to have a wedding." Lena laughed, covering her face. "You told her?" Adrian shrugged, smiling. "She's good at overhearing things." The three of them spent the morning walking by the lake, making plans that were half real, half imagined. Lila decided she would be the flower girl and that the family dog, Toby, would carry the rings. Adrian said he'd cook his famous soup for the reception, and Lena said she'd bake the cake. It was all lighthearted, but underneath it all was something real. The quiet promise that no matter what happened next, they'd face it together. When they returned home, Lena started writing again. This time, she didn't write about pain or forgiveness. She wrote about beginnings, how love doesn't fix your past but gives you a reason to stop living inside it. Her new piece was called "The Joke That Became a Promise." It wasn't published anywhere at first. She kept it to herself, reading it aloud only to Adrian and Lila on rainy evenings. Years passed. Lila grew into a bright young woman who loved books as much as Lena did. She often teased them, saying, "You two are the only couple who started because of a prank and ended up being the most romantic story I know." And maybe she was right. The night before their small wedding ceremony, Lena couldn't sleep. She stood by the window looking at the stars again, the same stars she had looked at the night Adrian first proposed in that restaurant. Back then, she had been trembling, afraid, unsure of what was real. Now she felt strong, certain, peaceful. She thought about the people who had once mocked her. Some had reached out years later to apologize. Others had faded into the background of life. She held no anger for any of them, because if that night had never happened, she might never have met the man who showed her what real respect looked like. The next morning was bright and warm. Friends, neighbors, and a few close family members gathered in their backyard under the old oak tree. The branches were decorated with white ribbons and small paper hearts that Lila had cut herself. Lena wore a simple dress, soft, flowing, nothing grand. Adrian wore a plain white shirt and a nervous smile. When they exchanged vows, there wasn't a single camera or reporter, just the sound of birds and Lila's laughter as she tossed petals in the air. Adrian looked at her and said, "I once told you I wanted dinner with you every night for the rest of our lives." "I still do." Lena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And I once thought no one would ever mean it when they said they loved me. But you did. You always did." Everyone clapped softly. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding. It was something better. It was real. Afterward, they ate together under the tree, sharing food, stories, and laughter. Lila made a toast with her glass of juice, saying, "To my parents, for turning a bad joke into the best story ever." Everyone laughed, and even Adrian had to wipe his eyes. That night, when the guests were gone and the lights were dim, Lena sat outside again, the moon hanging low and bright above the house. She thought about the girl she used to be, scared, shy, always waiting for life to start. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who had learned that even the cruelest moments could bloom into something kind. She whispered into the night, "Thank you for that terrible joke. Without it, I'd never have found this." Inside, Adrian called her name softly and she turned, smiling as she walked back in. And just like that, the story that had once started as humiliation ended as grace, a reminder that sometimes life's cruelest tricks can become its greatest gifts, because what began as a setup meant to embarrass her had become a home built on love, laughter, and truth. And though the world would eventually forget the headlines, those who were there that night would always remember the moment when a single father stood up in a crowded restaurant, took the hand of a woman who had been mocked, and turned a cruel joke into a lifelong promise.